Toyota Auris sponsors ITV mystery drama.
Not long until the winners and losers of the 13th Annual South Bank Awards will be revealed. That's after the news at 10 now with Mark Austin and Julie Etchingham.
The biggest global downturn since the Second World War, and Britain will be hardest hit. Today's report from the IMF makes grim reading. The world's leading economies are shrinking drastically, and the UK's performance will be worst of all.
Also on News at 10.
We can make a future. We can bring back the past.
Feelings run high in Northern Ireland, how a plan to resolve the legacy of the Troubles sparked anger. A nursing home manager is charged with murder, accused of killing 3 women in her care. And remembering the pain and the joy, an exclusive interview with the father whose daughter was born after his wife died.
I have my baby, but I've lost my wife.
Good evening. For a Prime Minister who keeps saying Britain is better placed to weather the recession than most other countries, it is a sobering assessment. Today, the International Monetary Fund said our recession will be the deepest of any developed country. Our output will fall by 2.8% this year, and the downturn, it says, will be the deepest since the Second World War. In a moment, our economics editor Daisy McAndrew will have reaction to that assessment from the World Economic Summit in Davos in Switzerland. First, our political editor Tom Bradby looks at what these predictions mean for government policy here and for the workforce of Britain.
Gordon Brown spent years telling us he'd abolish boom and bust and made our economy uniquely strong and vibrant. But the IMF said today it was actually going to shrink 2.8% this year, and guess where that left us? Yes, right at the bottom of the international class, which makes this...
Britain is, in fact, better positioned to deal with these problems.
A lousy prediction. Nor was that all. The respected economic think tank, the IFS, said the government would either have to raise taxes or cut public spending to the tune of £20 billion a year to get the nation's finances back on track. And even then, it'd take 20 years to get public sector debt back to pre-crisis levels.
Our assessment is that, consistent with the Treasury's forecast, they wouldn't be expecting to see debt back to pre-crisis levels until the early 2030s. So that suggests it would take a generation or so to pay this money off.
In the Commons, David Cameron challenged the Prime Minister to admit he'd been wrong.
Will he finally admit, even on his own definition, that something every economist, every business, every family in the country knows to be true? He didn't abolish boom and bust.
This is a recession which is facing every country and continent in the world. And everybody except the Conservative Party agrees this is not a unique United Kingdom phenomenon. This is something that has got to be dealt with internationally.
Even one of his own advisers said this week, it's against Gordon's nature to do a mea culpa, but at some stage we've got to find the words. Well, why doesn't he find the words now? You didn't abolish boom and bust, did you?
Mr. Speaker, we can play his game of student politics as long as he wants to play.
Only one of us was a student politician, and he's never grown out of it.
So what is the truth?
The UK has entered this downturn in a rather less healthy position than most other economies. We've had household debt running at record highs, house prices dramatically overvalued, savings rates very low, we've been running a large current account deficit, and of course the government has been running up a large budget deficit.
It's certainly been an uncomfortable day for ministers. The key question tonight, do they now admit errors in the past? Tom Bradby, News at 10 at Westminster.
The World Economic Forum in Switzerland was already struggling to come to terms with the global crisis even before today's IMF report. Today, Russia's Prime Minister Vladimir Putin told the forum the pyramid debts of the West were to blame. As our economics editor Daisy McAndrew reports now from Davos, he and 40 other world leaders now know they're facing the worst year for the world's economy for more than 6 decades.
Not since World War II has the world's economy faced such disaster, according to the IMF report, which predicts a slump this year not seen since the 40s, with global growth falling to just 0.5%. That's less than a quarter of what they were predicting just 2 months ago. Not exactly the ideal backdrop for the world's most exclusive celebration of free market capitalism and globalisation. No surprise, though, to Nouriel Roubini, nicknamed Dr. Doom, when his sole voice predicted this unholy mess.
The risk we're facing is that, like in the Great Depression, if we don't resolve the problems, then you have nationalism, you have militarism, you have aggression, in a situation which is not going to be healthy. This social-political risk is going to lead to greater geopolitical risk, and that's going to be a further downside for financial markets.
The power pendulum has swung away from the so-called masters of the universe, the Wall Street titans, many of whom this week are notable by their absence, and towards the politicians. No coincidence then that this week we'll see more heads of state come to Davos than ever before, 40 at the last count. That's because ultimately it's the politicians who will have to clear up the mess.
And it's a mess politicians all over the world are facing. Germany is now forecast a 2.5% decline in growth, almost as bleak as ours. In the States, a 1.6% fall is being predicted. But it's the Russian forecast that's changed the most dramatically, falling from expected growth of 3% to an expected contraction of 0.7%. Something not lost on Vladimir Putin, who described the crisis as the perfect storm caused by the inflated expectations of Western consumers and business models.
That was not a prosperity earned, but rather an earned, borrowed prosperity. And such a pyramid of expectations should sooner or later collapse. That is what is happening.
The nervousness in Davos is easy to understand. Since the forum last met, $25 trillion have been wiped off the value of stocks. And just today, the UN has predicted 50 million jobs could go this year worldwide.
And both Tom and Daisy are standing by tonight. You first, Daisy, in Davos. The IMF predictions are pretty dire. What are people there making of it?
Well, even before this report came out this afternoon, the mood here was kind of bewildered, pretty cowed, and also a bit humble, as the politicians had been demanding the business people must take some responsibility. And of course, now that they have seen these predictions from the IMF, they're feeling even more depressed than they were about the outlook. But when it comes to the UK particularly, there is a little bit of "I told you so" creeping into the language of the economists and the business people I've spoken to over the last few hours. Firstly, they've been saying, well, the financial services sector in the UK is bigger than in other countries. So because this recession was caused by a credit crunch, the financial services sector was always going to suffer most. Therefore, the UK was going to suffer most. Secondly, they've been talking, as you heard in Tom Piece, about the personal debt that the average Brit has. Because we've got so much owed on credit cards and mortgages, and because this is a credit crunch, we're going to be affected worse than other countries. And lastly, government spending. The big overdraft that the government is running, the big deficit, means that our British government is in a less stable position, has got less wriggle room than other governments have to deal with this recession or depression if it turns into one.
Daisy, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to Tom. Tom, at the end of your report, you asked whether Gordon Brown would admit mistakes. Will he?
Well, that is certainly, Mark, what is now being talked about behind closed doors here, the question of whether he should, certainly by his advisors. His argument is that recessions used to be caused by inflation getting out of control and then interest rates having to go up and everything going flat. His point is, by handing control of all that to the Bank of England, he actually sorted his problem, and he says that's what he meant. In intellectual terms, there is something to that argument, though of course you could say that the relentless pressures of globalization pushing down prices, making everything cheaper, had at least as much to do with it. But transparently, saying you'd abolish boom and bust was a hubristic thing to do. I think, as you heard in my report there, we can also say that Gordon Brown as Chancellor could very easily have said halfway through this boom, hold on a sec, everyone, this is all getting a bit out of control. And at the very least, he could have privately decided to balance the budget and reduce our debt as far as possible. Instead, public spending went ahead at an incredible pace. The question now, though, does he change his tune? Is it not working? Is he upsetting people by continuing to stick to his line? Quite a lot of Labour people think that really something's got to change in there, and he's going to have to come forward and at least admit some errors, say he didn't get everything right. I think, knowing what we know about Gordon Brown, that is not going to be an easy step at all.
All right, Tom, thank you very much indeed.
And against that backdrop, more British jobs were lost today. More than 1,000 workers at mail-order company Store Direct, the old Littlewoods Home Shopping, are to lose theirs. One of their call centres in Merseyside is closing.
But there was some good news today as the supermarket chain Asda announced it is creating 7,000 jobs. It is opening 14 new stores and expanding 15 others. The company plans to hire people who have recently lost jobs and the long-term unemployed.